welcome everyone to the July 2021, forget what month it is sometimes, Minnesota Climate Adaptation Partnership webinar. My name is Joel Larson and I'm the Associate Director at the University of Minnesota's Water Resources Center. Today we are joined by several panelists, but before we introduce them and turn things over, just wanted to share a couple of logistical announcements. For the webinar, the panelists, the group will talk for about 45 minutes, and then we'll spend the remainder of the time on questions from the audience. So while you all are muted, you can ask your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And you can also see other people's questions and upvote those that you would like to see asked. We are recording this webinar and we're planning to post it at a later date. And at the end of the webinar, we'll have a brief evaluation for you to answer if you have not already for one of these. We really appreciate the feedback that we get from those, both in terms of how things are going with the webinar, as well as additional topics or other ideas that you think that we could cover in series like these. So now getting to the good stuff and the reason why you're here, it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists who will be talking about the Twin Ports climate conversations. This is one that I've been looking forward to for quite a while because we inadvertently scheduled our webinars at the same time as the climate conversations are happening. So it was very fortuitous, and I'm very glad that we were able to arrange this conversation for us today. The panel will give a brief overview of the group and then spend the rest of the time with a discussion on topics like partnership development, future directions, how others can learn from the group, and then opening it up to the Q&A. So in terms of the panelists, we're joined by several of them here. So Natalie Chin is the University of Wisconsin Sea Grant Institute's Climate and Tourism Outreach Specialist. She works broadly on issues related to climate change and tourism, including flood resilience, accessibility in the outdoors, and how climate change will impact tourism and outdoor recreation in Wisconsin. Julie McDonnell works with Minnesota's Lake Superior Coastal Program at the Department of Natural Resources in support of Minnesota's coastal area. Julie applies a climate change lens to technical assistance programming while working to develop community awareness and adaptation practice throughout Minnesota's coastal communities. Madison Rodman is a resilience extension educator with the University of Minnesota Sea Grant Program. Her work focuses on strengthening Minnesota's coastal communities, economies, and their environments to better prepare for and respond to extreme weather events and changes in climate. And Hilary Sorensen is the climate specialist at the 1854 Treaty Authority, governed by the Bois Forte Band of Chippewa and the Grand Portage Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. Hilary's role is to implement the 1854 ceded territory climate change adaptation plan completed in 2016 through collaboration with Bois Forte, Grand Portage, and Fond du Lac. And with that, I will turn things over to the speakers, and thank you all again for joining us.
Thank you, Joel, for the introduction and the invitation to present. I'm at the MCAP webinar series today. And thank you to the audience members from MCAP and TPCC that have joined us today. So welcome everyone, and just confirming that you can see my slides. It looks okay, perfect. So like Joel said, my name is Madison Rodman. I'm a resilience extension educator with the University of Minnesota here in Sea Grant program based in Duluth. I'm gonna kick today's presentation off, but I'm joined by Natalie Chin, Julie McDonnell, Hilary Sorensen, and our other teammate, Kristen Schmitt from the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science couldn't join us today, but the 5 of us here make up the planning and coordination team for the Twin Ports climate conversations, which we're just so excited to share with you more about today. So for the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to transport you. So wherever you're coming from today and wherever you're joining us, I want you to imagine yourself on the shores of Lake Superior in our beautiful Twin Ports of Duluth, Minnesota and Superior, Wisconsin, where we will share more about our group and some highlights of approximately over the last 7 years or so that we've been active. We're also going to share a bit more about how we're continuing to change and adapt through time. And after a brief presentation from me, the four of us on the call today will have a discussion about partnership, challenges, and what the future looks like for our group, followed by some Q&A from you all. So without further ado, the Twin Ports Climate Conversations, or as we lovingly call them, TPCC, are opportunities for monthly community dialogues on climate change. They span a wide variety of topics, but our conversations focus on climate change impacts, adaptation responses, mitigation, and resilience. So here's an image from a TPCC back in 2018, where participants learned more about wild rice restoration at Fond du Lac. Lastly, they are coordinated and facilitated by a team, a partnership among multiple agencies and organizations. So here's our team today and our respective affiliations. And over the years, this team has shifted and changed. So we want to take a moment to acknowledge all of our previous TPCC team members who have contributed to not only the forming and past organization and facilitation of conversations. And those players include Tom Beery, Diane Desatel, Anne Moore, Tansy Moore, Tiffany Sprague, and you can see their affiliations of all those folks and when they were active kind of in the TPCC space. So thanks to those five, and also thanks to all the people that have helped make TPCC possible over the last 6 or 7 years. So if you've presented, if you've joined us at an event here in the Twin Ports, thank you all. We didn't have enough space to thank everybody that's helped us over the years. And so the planning team that you see here and audience feedback we've received have helped to shape our mission, which you can see here, and it's currently to aid and improve climate change communication skills for all, improve climate change related data collection and sharing, motivate and support community-based adaptation, increase climate change conversation in more sectors, and broaden the impact. And new in 2020, so recently, a mission statement has been added to include and consider climate justice in each conversation. And at the beginning of each conversation, we invite folks to consider our mission and how each presentation fits in. And we've had some questions over time about who the audience is for TPCC. And we really respond that it's anyone interested in the conversations about climate change and community preparedness in northeastern Minnesota and northwestern Wisconsin. And although we welcome community members that want to join us with open arms, we're really focused primarily on that professional audience. So that's why our events take place on the workday, usually from noon to 1 on the third Tuesday of the month. So right now when you're joining us, and attendance varies by topic, but we usually see around 20 to 60 participants. And most of these folks are repeat attendees. But as Julie McDonnell has shared with me recently, we have over 2,800 people on our mailing list. So we never quite know who will show up to a Twin Ports climate conversation. And for a better representation of who's been attending our meetings, here's a word cloud of the attendees organizations over the last year and a half or so. So you can see there's good representation from the Minnesota DNR, local universities here in Duluth and Superior, the MPCA, EPA, city governments, county governments, SWCDs, and more. Maybe you'll find your organization among the mix. And before our meetings were held virtually, they were held in person. So attendance was usually limited to those in the immediate Twin Ports area or folks that were, happened to be in town on a Tuesday and able to join us in person. But as of March 2020, we moved our participation and our presentations online to a virtual format. And we've seen an increase in attendance across the state, but also along the North Shore and into Wisconsin as well. So we've removed that barrier for folks needing to drive to our meetings and really seen an increase in attendance from across the state, which we're really excited about. And if you're curious and you're like a data junkie like me, you look at patterns and trends in our attendance, and you can see there's one neighborhood in Duluth, that's the Park Point neighborhood on Minnesota Point, has had the highest attendance by far of any community or neighborhood to our Twin Ports climate conversations. So kudos to our Park Point residents and community members. We have had some very specific tailored topics about Minnesota Point in the last year, but they have been attending regularly for our meetings. Also, you can see we've had about 600 attendees over the last year, and most of them come from Minnesota. Like I mentioned before, we've covered a variety of topics, and I want to highlight some of what we've covered in our past meetings over the years, so you can have a bit of a flavor of what we do before we start our discussion. So in the early years, in the first few years, TPCC hosted a variety of local tours, visiting stormwater infrastructure, green roofs, rain gardens, energy efficient buildings in the area. I've heard these tours were excellent. I didn't get to participate in any, but they sound awesome. We've hosted events on climate change communication skills, covered topics on North Shore tourism, fisheries, recreation, discussed maple sugar production and the health of wild rice, the photo you saw earlier, a variety of topics on Lake Superior and our forest. And throughout, we've provided updates on Minnesota's climate and weather, along with sharing regional projections when available. In recent years, we've moved online, like I mentioned, and increased our participation and reach across Minnesota and the region. We've covered topics such as climate change and its impact on local food production. We've provided updates on Minnesota's greenhouse gas emissions and the City of Duluth Sustainability Plan and Sustainability Officer. We've offered conversations on transportation, both motorized and non-motorized here in the Twin Ports, discussed assisted migration on the Superior National Forest and habitat resilience on the North Shore. And with recent high water levels, we've covered topics relating to coastal impacts and the long view of Minnesota Point. Lastly, we've discussed the tribal adaptation menu and the GWOW, or Guiding for Tomorrow strategy for climate communication. So suffice to say, this group has covered a lot of ground in its topics since founding. And these are all focused in a non-advocacy role. So all the coordinators and organizers we're not advocates. So we're here to present science and coordinate, but that we're not in an advocacy position. And like I said earlier, we couldn't have done it with all the presenters who have shared their projects and expertise with us over the years. And this is just a highlight. So there's been 6 or 7 years. It's hard to pick out all of the topics, but here's just a sampling of what we've done. But now many of you are probably interested in, especially if you're thinking of hosting similar conversations in your community, is how do we get here? And first I'll mention that I joined the team in 2020, so I don't have all the historical knowledge of the full history, and the other presenters on the call today can always jump in, but we will hear from them in a little bit. So about 7 years ago, folks working here in the Twin Ports had a desire to normalize conversations about climate change, especially in our northern Minnesota communities. And although different people were working on different projects and different agencies, it was a bit fragmented and there was lack of coordination and transparency among those working on climate change projects. There was a need to share information on local efforts and partners so that folks didn't need to reinvent the wheel and would know who was working on what projects and with what capacity and at what scale. And TPC kind of stepped in and provided this community around climate in Duluth and Superior. We've heard it's a place people can go to learn and share with other professionals, even if climate change isn't in their job description. And at the right here, you can see an announcement, a draft announcement about our first event featuring state climatologist Kenny Blumenfeld, providing an update on observations and climate trends in Minnesota. And back when we met in person, I've even heard there was lunch sometimes provided. And throughout TPCC's history, we've made it a priority to check in with our audience regarding their needs and topic ideas. And the first large survey was completed in 2018 with feedback from about 150 folks. And we just recently completed another survey in 2021 with over 170 responses. Data from the survey in 2018 was recently published in the Journal of Extension, which we can make sure to share a link to in the chat. In addition to shaping our future events and focus, these surveys show how participants are using information from TPCC to make professional contacts, have conversations about climate change outside of TPCC events, and to take action. And action items reported in our surveys, and especially our recent survey, include choosing different plants for public property plantings, contacting legislators, and including climate adaptation information and grant proposals, among more. Additionally, in the last year or so, we've added a new mission statement item indicating our commitment to climate justice and held an interactive session with Dr. Heidi Roop from the University of Minnesota on what barriers folks are facing in their adaptation work. And results from this activity with Heidi are also helping to shape our future as a climate community in the region. So all these formal and informal audience feedback opportunities help to shape the TPCC of the future. And we're not quite 100% sure what that will look like, but we know it will be informed by our audience and, of course, our survey results. And as we move into the future, we aim to highlight environmental and climate justice issues and projects in our community, along with increasing the diversity of our partners and presenters. We want to move from more information sharing model towards action in that non-advocacy role. And we see providing training on skills and tools as part of that action. We've already done that already, but these workshops and trainings will continue into the future and maybe even possibly scale up. And we also see action as assembling others and gathering them together towards working on projects and grants in collaboration. Lastly, we've found that these virtual meetings that we've been hosting since March of 2020 have worked well from some of our attendees, as we can see by the attendance up the shore and into the state as well. But not everyone is wanting to continue virtual meetings all the time. So we look forward to being back in person for those in-person tours that we did earlier on in our history and field trips, and perhaps larger in-person events again. And so with that, this is my short overview presentation is over. So I want to thank you for your attention and share the other TPCC's team members' contact information. So you could grab a screenshot of this real quick, or we can make sure to share this afterwards. But feel free to contact any of us if you have questions or are interested in learning more about our group, or would even like to present. And so after this presentation that I give, we're going to take about 20 or so minutes to have a discussion with the rest of the TPCC team here today. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then give our other panelists a moment to introduce themselves before we do our questions. So we didn't practice this one, but do we want to say hello before we jump right into questions?
Want to call on us?
Oh, Hilarie, how about you kick it off?
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Hilary Sorensen. I am the climate specialist with the 1854 Treaty Authority. We are an intertribal natural resource management agency. We apply to the off-reservation hunting, fishing, and gathering rights of the Bois Forte and Grand Portage bands located in present-day Northeast Minnesota. And I work on climate adaptation pretty much throughout that entire area.
Oh, Natalie, how about you go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Natalie Chin. I'm the Climate and Tourism Outreach Specialist with Wisconsin Sea Grant. And as Joel mentioned, I work pretty broadly on issues related to climate change and tourism. I'm also pretty new to the TPCC planning team. I also joined in 2020. So don't have a lot of the historical context, but it's been a great group to be a part of, and looking forward to a good Q&A today.
Julie?
Hi, I feel like we've had a couple of introductions already, but Julie McDonnell at Minnesota's Lake Superior Coastal Program, which is in the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. And I am here through a grant Minnesota gets from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration to attend to Minnesota's coastal area, and really have been focusing on coastal community resilience for a number of years now, and we've got a lot of work to do. Glad to be here today. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. So our first question that I'm going to kick off with is on the theme of kind of normalizing conversations around climate change. So as we know, not everyone that has been involved with TPCC over the years, even in our planning team, has solely climate change focused positions. So how is this helpful in building this program from the beginning and helping to normalize it so others see that climate change is part of their job?
I can start with this one and then others can jump in. I forgot to mention during my introduction that my previous job was with Minnesota Sea Grant in Madison's former role, or Madison's current role. And I was new in the position around the time that TPCC started with Julie McDonnell. This was her brainchild to start these conversations around climate change with trying to pull in different folks from different sectors working on this very large, complex problem. And I remember I was one of the very few positions that was full-time focused on climate adaptation. And I remember sitting down with Julie and talking to some of our other partners, and people were pretty overwhelmed at the time. And there was really a lack of information sharing about who was doing what. People had sort of this overwhelming feeling that if they were working on climate change, they had to do everything. And so we started these conversations as a way to kind of break out different pieces of the puzzle and create, as Madison mentioned earlier, more of this network or this community of professionals who in some way, shape, or form are tackling one piece of that climate change puzzle. And so that's really, it was a big goal of how to start these, and how we did that, how we, broke out these different pieces was really with these individual conversations of sitting down with a city of Duluth planner or a stormwater engineer or a forester and kind of teasing out, even if they didn't think they were working on climate change or didn't know where to begin, maybe they had a project that was in some way related to adaptation or building community resiliency. And so it became this really great two-way information exchange from those of us who were working on this full time to better understand what needs the community had. And then also the community was able to maybe pull out some different pieces of learning about one of their neighbors or one of their colleagues who was interested in working on a project or was working on a project that they may have not known about before. And so it's really great to see now, 7 years on, how much of a community has been created in the Twin Ports region around climate adaptation and how much information has been shared over the years.
Thanks, Hilary. Natalie or Julie, do you want to add anything to that question, response?
I would just add that I feel like we were really fortunate that Minnesota Sea Grant had the foresight to have a position. And I think originally Diane Desatel was that first one in the, even maybe it was part-time, but that was the trial. And just to kind of get it going before anyone was really talking about climate change. And back in 2009, I was fortunate enough to be, not through the DNR, but through just my individual citizen of Duluth, was able to go to a sister city exchange to Växjö, Sweden, where Duluth sister city, we were greeted by one of the 3 climate scientists for the city by giving a presentation about climate change. And then I took that week there to really learn about their behavior change and really started getting me thinking about social science. And then I kind of came back here seeing that, gosh, I really didn't hear people talking about climate change professionally very much. I know people in science knew this is happening, but nobody had it in their job. So fortunately, Sea Grant kind of got their feet on the ground, and we were able to build a little bit of momentum by just taking little pieces of everyone's time, because I know it's going to impact them, but then to just have the conversations about, somebody might not think this is in their job or impacting them, or that they don't have time to do it. But when we have a presentation about something that they can see that is going to impact them, the conversation is now normal. And so it has just grown, and certainly we didn't start it all, but anyway, I feel like we've done something to move the conversation forward.
Natalie, any other comments before we move to the next question?
Just going to mention that even though my job is focused on climate change, I think having the opportunity to learn about local issues is so valuable for someone who's new to the region too. I do work in Superior, but I'm completely new to the Twin Ports. And so I think that, these conversations have been really great for getting up to speed on local issues and putting global issues in a local context. So.
Absolutely. So the next question is going to be on the theme of partnership. And I talked a little bit about our partnership in the presentation. But what was the process for starting out these partnerships among different agencies and different staff and sustaining them over time? So was there coordination that was needed to coordinate among tribal, state, federal agencies and academia?
I'll start off. I will say that this was not created with a lot of formality. I started my career at Minnesota Pollution Control Agency in the Clean Water Partnership Program. So I learned right out of college the true value of having stakeholders together and having the partners at the table and what you can accomplish through a partnership effort. So I just knew how important that was, and really without the formality and being kind of humble, I would just kind of talk to people that I knew, relationships that I had developed, professional relationships over time, and asking people if they would be willing to share some small bit of their time and bring whatever their skills and talents are forward. Someone might be really good at facilitating the meeting. Someone could do a little bit of graphic work. Somebody could host a site. Somebody would find a speaker and work through that. So it was really humble. And I would say that it's so important to support each other, because without bits and pieces of support, it may not have gotten off the ground. And I would say even like Rich Axler, who wanted to be behind the scenes, he was willing to come to the kind of conversations about it. He didn't want to be in the front, but just his words of support helped get us going. And I'm really grateful for all the partnerships, but didn't have a formal process, sorry.
No, it worked, Julie, right? We're here today. So Natalie or Hilary, anything to add on about partnerships?
I would just add that it's been great that partnerships in all these organizations have kind of stayed together in some way, shape, or form. I know positions have changed, people have come and gone, but there have been some really consistent ones, like Sea Grant, for example, and of course Julie's position have been those organizations have been doing this throughout this entire time. And then also just bringing on new partners, it's been really, yeah, just really great to see the diversity that all these different partnerships are able to bring into these conversations. And the ideas, these planning meetings, I will say, are pretty fun. Everybody's kind of throwing out different ideas and everybody's really supportive. And so I think that's a big part of sustaining these partnerships is that dynamic of having just really great people to work with and really great ideas flying around all the time. If only there were more months in the year.
Natalie, if you have anything to add, otherwise we'll jump to the next question. Okay, next question. So the next one, we're going to switch a little bit and talk about challenges. So what challenges have we faced over the years, maybe as staff have transitioned on and off, as we experience a pandemic together, and we can maybe all chime in here on some challenges that we've seen or noticed with TPCC and maybe how we've addressed them.
I definitely will say, while Sea Grant has been consistent and has had people and has a position right out there supporting us, there was a period of time when nobody was there, and it was kind of tough, and also a time when not a lot of people either had extra time in their jobs. I think really probably everyone here in a working position feels a little bit overwhelmed, like we have more than enough to do, and it's too hard to take on more, especially something that's not even really in their job description. So it has been hard sometimes that way, but I feel like we've got such a strong group right now. That's all the distant past, but and then also maybe even proposing a new idea. I would say not everybody's on board, and something like climate change being a wicked problem, and it was kind of before everybody's all on board saying, yeah, we're going to do something about it. People might not be necessarily eager to jump into a new idea, maybe not knowing how that's going to be successful or how this is going to work out when there isn't a real clear plan. So I think people were really generous, who did step forward, but it wasn't always easy. So. one other last thing I'll mention, somebody else could elaborate on, is something we get in surveys and even from conversation with people in an audience is that they want us to take a stand against line 3 or have these meetings at night. You need to announce this to the public more broadly. And so not everybody understands of kind of our focus is really professional, and some of our organizations, we're all working within an organization and we have our job descriptions, and we don't have the freedom to go do all the things that some kind of environmental activist groups want us to do. So we're all working within our bounds to move the conversation forward as best we can.
Thanks, Julie.
I guess one of the challenges that I've seen just throughout this tenure of this group is one, capacity. We mentioned the benefits of having some few positions focused on climate change, but a lot of the partners that we work with or who have presented or been involved in some way, shape, or form, including some of us on this planning committee, their job is not full-time climate change. And it has been challenging over the years to get funding, to get support, and to just not feel completely overwhelmed of also working on climate change while having a full-time position, doing something that may be related, but something that is not under that, explicitly under that climate change umbrella. The other challenge that it's not so much of a problem now, but definitely was in the early years, is the visibility of climate change in Northeast Minnesota. This focus on protection over restoration, or getting preemptive action to tackle climate adaptation when there's not visibly a problem. Lake Superior looks very clean and very good, and we don't have some of the natural hazards, or as many of the natural hazards that many other coastal communities deal with. And so getting that momentum to push forward on climate adaptation and having these regular conversations was at times challenging, just because it wasn't as obvious of a problem as it is in some other areas of North America and even of the region. So those are two that I can think of.
I can jump in. So one thing that I'll mention, and I mentioned a little bit in my intro, is I joined the team in 2020. I had never attended, I still haven't attended a TPCC in person. And so right when I joined the group, we were faced with an option of what do we do with TPCC? I remember talking with Julie and others on the team. We had a conversation coming up in a couple days, and we said, oh, should we just postpone it? And we decided, you know what, we're going to try hosting it on Zoom. We don't know what's going to happen. And we took a little leap of faith. And so it was a little bit uncomfortable, right? Changing it for all of our attendees, mixing things up. But I think it really worked, and it showed that, we can be flexible. And now when we go back to in person, we can really benefit from the times we are together. And we've realized there are some things that are just great in person. We can have a little bit longer conversations. We have that opportunity for lunch and networking. But that was one challenge, right? We were faced with an opportunity, and we could have said, you know what, we're going to put TPC on hold as we kind of adjust to a new way of life and working from home. But we continued and had great attendance. And I think people found that regularity of having our meetings and connecting with colleagues across different organizations really beneficial in those early 2020 days. So I'm going to keep us moving along onto one more question. Next question. This one's about the future. So get out the crystal ball and thinking about what did we learn from that most recent survey in 2021, and how are we responding to that needs? So how is that group working to move from information sharing to action and exploring our ideas around climate justice? So anything about the future?
Yeah, sure. I can jump in here. So as Madison mentioned, this survey that we sent out was in April and May of this year. And we sent it out especially to attendees over the last year, since we thankfully had their email addresses because of going virtual. And then also more broadly. So we opened it up to the rest of the community too, to see if there were folks who maybe we aren't engaging and they had some ideas or suggestions about how we could improve our reach. And we did get about 171 responses. And we repeated some of the questions from the previous survey that was sent out, that was mentioned earlier, and then added some new ones about, you know, how we're doing in terms of new vision, new mission statements, you know, achieving the goals that we have set out for the group. And you know, in general, the feedback is positive, and there's indication that the TPCCs have been beneficial to attendees and enabled networking and also specific actions to be taken, which is great to see that we're still having impact after being around for several years now. And then as Madison mentioned, kind of these two key points for improvement. One is this interest really in moving from information sharing to action. And then the others are, you know, how we can better involve folks who aren't already invested in climate change to attend or just be involved in these conversations that we're having. And so how we do this, I mean, I think we're already doing some of it, and maybe part of it is a communications problem. Folks don't always know what we're doing month to month if they can't attend every month. But, you know, also, you know, thinking about climate justice, it's just a big problem. And, you know, working with the capacity and the space that we have in our jobs, and also to be non-advocacy, it makes things challenging, or, you know, opportunities for creativity, I guess, maybe is a better way of saying it. And so I think as we transition back to in-person meetings, at some point, eventually, some of the in-person training might get a little bit easier. And then, you know, we're always on the lookout for new ideas and topics, and constantly brainstorming about how to do a better job of involving different groups. And we've talked about having a half-day meeting on climate justice, and that's not something we've spent a lot of time on or have a clear vision for yet, but would definitely welcome ideas and suggestions from folks here today. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing where this group grows. There's a lot of good brain power, and I'm sure we'll do our best to adapt and move forward in the future.
Thanks, Natalie. Hilarie or Julie, anything to add about the future?
Just that, sort of to reiterate what Natalie mentioned of some comments in the survey, and also something that we've talked about as the planning committee, of how do you reach out to more partners to bring folks in who are not already part of this conversation. You know, we get a lot of the preaching to the choir, as I'm sure many of us do in our various organizations. So I don't really have an answer to this question, but I guess I'll just throw it out there. As an organization who, you know, we do have these great long-term sustaining partnerships, but how do you continue to build those out and bring in more viewpoints to these conversations? So it's just more of a question.
I will say that I hope we continue to have more spin-offs from this, because really when we talk about normalizing the conversation, it doesn't stop there. It's kind of, let's all learn everything we can and figure things out amongst our colleagues and do more. And we have had a few spin-offs from these programs. I'm sure there are multiple that I don't know about, and I hope that something they heard at one of these presentations can inspire someone in a local setting or wherever they may be to just pick up and do something similar to move the conversation and then action forward with regard to climate change.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks, Natalie. Thanks, Hilarie. So I think that was our last question for us that we've had set. And I think now I'm going to turn it back to Joel, and he can help moderate some Q&A from the audience today.
Great. Well, thank you all again for that. And it's part of why I was excited for this was just some opportunities to learn from you all and what the Climate Adaptation Partnership, which is working with very similar things, might be able to take away from the lessons and the experience that you've had. So we've got a few questions right now from the audience, and for the audience, if you have others, please add them in. But kind of building off of what Julie, you just shared, Are you aware of other similar programs in northern Minnesota, specifically near Ely or Grand Marais, and are folks from these communities involved in your work?
Well, Joel, since you mentioned my name, I will start. I am not particularly aware. We have done some work, the coastal program anyway, with others and sponsoring some kind of adaptation kind of work in northeastern Minnesota in the Grand Marais area. We're always open to more, and it kind of depends on what the community is asking for and what they're ready for, and if that's something we can deliver. But in the coastal program tries to facilitate getting a community or people the help that they need. I have had multiple people reach out to me from other parts of the state saying, gosh, this is so cool. How did you do this? What did you do? And anyone can do it. If I can kind of call some colleagues that I know a little bit and kind of build a partnership effort, then I think anyone can. So I don't know specifically right now about Grand Marais and Ely or another area in the Northeast, but here we go. There, and I'd have to take well, the mailing list probably wouldn't even tell me. We could look back at Madison's distribution list to see where they're coming from. I'm sure people have attended conversations. I can only hope that that kind of inspires them to do something more locally too.
Yeah, Julie, I was just looking at the map when you were talking. And so it looks like we do have some folks that have attended. We don't know, I could have to dig a little bit more, whether they were community members or in that professional capacity from both, the Grand Marais and Ely area. So they might be coming, but I'm not aware of any specific groups that are like ours in those two communities. But maybe Hilarie and Natalie would know.
Yeah, I know we've had some speakers and some partners in contributing their information and knowledge from the, Grand Portage Band, which is just north of Grand Marais, and also from the Ely area. And the only organizations I can think of are really sector specific. So kind of within forestry, they might have some climate conversations, but I am not aware of any others that are like TPCC that really are across sectors and across jurisdictions.
Yeah, I think we've talked about how my involvement is kind of the first time we've had someone from Wisconsin on the planning team too. And I'm also not really aware of anything, any similar groups, kind of looking eastward in Wisconsin, but we've been really trying to add some balance in terms of our speakers and bringing folks in from Wisconsin as well as from Minnesota and the Twin Ports. So that's been great.
So kind of a little follow-up to that then, thinking back to 6 years ago, or in similar things that you've been doing, of what are one or two or three things that you would, steps or tasks that you would suggest people take if they want to start even a small scale similar conversation, say in Ely or Grand Marais or another community like this?
I think when we started, they started very small, and those in-person tours were really a great way to get the momentum going. I know we're in a, COVID era right now where that's harder, but that to me, those were the most memorable ones. And those are the ones where maybe it was a smaller group of people, but it was a pretty diverse group of people to be able to come out and see the stormwater infrastructure in Duluth, for example. So if there's any way to do that, I think that's a fantastic way to get something like this going.
I would add the topics can really make an audience interested or not. And so depending on the area that you're in and something that resonates with people, something that a lot of people are concerned about, And then also reaching out to some of the local experts, because there are, like, I'm really impressed with the DNR interpretive naturalists at the state parks. They are talking about climate change with the public all the time, and they can kind of weave story into it to say, look at something that we're seeing here and how is that impacting us. And I would say also to really support each other and be the inspiration, because I know I would not be where I am today without having had people just kind of believe in some big idea that I had and kind of support me, rather than writing it off, but to say, oh, that's a really good idea. What can I do? Or let's think through it together, or just offering some bit of support. So reaching out to your partners, and certainly if you're in the Grand Marais area and you want to start climate conversations, anyone can absolutely reach out to me, and I will help with however I can get that off the ground.
And I'll just add one more thing onto Hilarie and Julie's. Hilarie kind of mentioned it, right? Start small. We have monthly conversations. They're regular, they're scheduled, but the early conversations, correct me if I'm wrong, folks, I think they were quarterly, if that. So, you know, there's nothing wrong with starting one event, dipping your toe into the water on a topic, like Julie mentioned, that's local and salient, and people want to come and discuss, you know, something that's really relevant, or it's a specific site they've seen gone up, or a new forest harvest that's in their area. So thinking about something that could bring people together, trying it out once, and that can be just a small step towards, you know, bringing a conversation into your community. You don't need to commit to 12 a year right off the bat.
In fact, I think we started off with one. Before we thought we were going to even go further, we were like, okay, and it was about interpreting, what was it called? Interpreting climate change in Northeast Minnesota. And we had that focus group, the audience, and then we picked 3 topics that we knew people would be really interested in, which was, we brought in experts about moose, what were they, invasive species, and I forget what the third one was. But we had a full room, a full day, people were interested, and then we decided, oh, let's kind of open this up a little more and expand the topics.
Great, thank you. So there are a couple of questions that came in about climate justice and environmental justice. So for the purposes of your conversations, can you define climate justice, and then can you also talk a little bit more about how you are incorporating climate justice and environmental justice into the conversations?
I can take a stab at it first, and sorry if I'm not going to be especially eloquent with my response, but you know, climate justice, the concept relates to environmental justice, and it's meant to capture the fact that historically marginalized and underserved communities are more or disproportionately impacted by climate change and environmental impact, environmental harm, and those kinds of impacts. And so I think that's kind of the working definition that we've worked with. I don't think we've talked about changing that at all. And so again, this is really new for us. It's something that we've tried to think more about over the last year. We did have a conversation last July where we brought our group together to watch a presentation from Antioch University about kind of environmental racism and the history of that. And so again, you know, we're still trying to figure out how to incorporate and work on this some more. I think also it's about including perspectives from diverse speakers, and we could do a better job, of course, but we are really trying to be intentional about that, and also just to broach the question at all of our sessions, you know, how does this relate to climate and environmental justice? And again, sometimes better and more effective than others, but those are kind of some of the ways. But it's definitely something we want to work on and do more around in the future.
I'll just add to what Natalie mentioned, that it's really the goal and something we've been thinking about and trying to start with is expanding those partnerships to people who have not or may not have participated in these conversations previously. And as Natalie mentioned, trying to increase the diversity of who is sharing at these conversations as well. So topics, you know, we've covered some, but definitely could move more in that direction moving forward. So trying to push forward with expanding those partnerships, I think, is a key.
Yeah, and I want to add, I've always looked at these climate conversations as it's not just our planning group that makes it what it is. As you've seen through the surveys, it has been shaped, but all the audiences and the participation. So everyone, I think, who is on our mailing list, or even if you're not, I mean, you can kind of inform and shape that. And so it's all of us together. And what we recognize is that we need to bring up the point that climate change is happening. The impacts are not equitable because some people are already getting impacted without even climate change on top of it. So it's kind of our responsibility to bring that forward, not necessarily our responsibility to solve it all. But we need everyone to work together in kind of bringing up ideas because we may not know what to do.
Great, thank you all. Yeah, there are certainly a tremendous amount of intersections between climate change and environmental justice, and both globally but also locally as well in terms of disproportionate impacts. Very important for all of us to be both keeping in mind, but more importantly, finding ways to incorporate those voices and learn from those voices. And Julie, like you said, taking action on that. Couple more, I think we have time for a couple more questions here. So is TPCC doing any work to educate local elected officials about climate issues that could be considered, or should be considered with regard to land use decision making? And then there's a reference to the City of Duluth Strategic Public Lands Realignment Project.
I'll just reiterate that we are not an advocacy group or organization. We want to bring forward topics about the changing climate and adaptation and mitigation opportunities. And the mailing list is open to everyone, and everyone is invited to participate. And we have not taken any particular local timely issue and said, oh, we need to have a presentation about that so someone surreptitiously hears about it. But we certainly have invited many City of Duluth, they're on the mailing list, and hopefully they will go to things. And then the idea of just kind of normalizing the conversation. The climate is changing, everyone, and how are you going to adapt to that in your work? And so hopefully through all of our years of efforts, people working in City of Duluth planning and natural resources, I know, are more aware about climate change. And certainly Diane is at the helm, City of Duluth Natural Resources, and she's well aware of the changing climate and the science about it. So she brings that science to her work.
Also mentioned Mindy, Greenlee, Sustainability Coordinator with the City of Duluth. So there are a few positions within the city that are focused a lot on climate adaptation, sustainability, helping to coordinate a lot of those different projects moving forward. Also to answer Mindy's question here about are the survey results shared on a website anywhere? I just want to make sure we get to that. I don't believe they are at this time. We could share them with you though.
Yeah, not yet. I think we have dreams to write it up a little bit more formally, Mindy, and get that shared out. So maybe it's on our to-do list as TPCC. And thanks for the reminder that we should, like any good survey, we need to go back to our audience and say, this is what we heard, and here's how we're applying it to our work. So Thanks for that friendly reminder. We're on it.
And really just a reminder about the humble beginnings and how this is kind of a piece of our jobs, small piece, but we were not online originally. We did not have any web presence because it's frankly something I couldn't get through the DNR. And fortunately, we're in a much better place right now with partners bringing their assets to the table and making it kind of more accessible for people. Like having all this stuff on Sea Grant's website, the past recorded conversations and the Zoom invitations and the whole thing. So we can't use Zoom at the DNR. So anyway, it just works out well to have a diverse group of partners working together to make it happen.
So kind of along those lines, and thank you for answering Mindy's question there as well. But in talking about your roles and the value that these conversations have, can you share a little bit about how you do that? I mean, there's collecting information through surveys, there's putting things on websites, but these are by their nature sometimes difficult to talk about what the outcomes and impact of the conversations like this can be. But you've obviously been successful in doing that as it's continued and been sustained. So can you talk about your ideas and ways that you've done that either internally or with your audiences?
Joel, I'm not sure if this fits exactly because I was trying to look for a file when you were saying, but there has been one spinoff that I am so excited about, and it was kind of some years ago, but I received a letter from Dr. Emily Onello, University of Minnesota Medical School in Duluth, and she's a local physician, and we had invited her to talk about climate change and public health at one presentation some years ago, and we paired her with Kristen from the Minnesota Department of Health Climate and Health Program. Well, they had never met each other before. I'm trying to pull up this document to see exactly what she said, but so she sent this thank you letter to me saying, thank you, because we hadn't met and we talked with each other at this climate conversation, and we decided to jointly pitch a presentation to, I can't find it at the last minute when you're trying to, they pitched a presentation to a Minnesota annual physicians kind of refresher conference, which was at that time not named, but they pitched this talk about climate change and public health, climate change impacts on health impacts. And then the conference came back to them, whatever, a couple months later, accepted it, and they named their conference then the Changing Climate of Physicians, whatever, but they named their whole conference about climate change. So I felt like, oh my gosh, this is really changing the momentum, and there are some behind the scenes things happening that we wouldn't even know about if people didn't tell us. And so it really is moving things forward.
It's always great to hear stories like that of how those connections continue long after the initial introduction is made. And I think, with I'll just say more broadly, with an issue like climate change, which is so broad and so extensive, those small wins and small changes can be really both motivating and illustrative for how we can make progress on addressing the issues. So we are at time here. I want to thank our panelists and thank Julie and Natalie and Madison and Hilarie again for joining us. This has been a great conversation. Just in the spirit of surveys, I'm going to put a link to our webinar evaluation in there. If you haven't taken that, please just take a few minutes to fill that out. I will also put a link to our MCAP subscription or email list if you'd like to subscribe to that as well. Our August webinar will be a slightly different format. I'm not being mysterious intentionally, but we are still in the planning phases of doing that. But we'll be sharing more information about that in the next few weeks. And we might even be able to arrange it at a time that's different than the Twin Ports climate conversation, so we're not overlapping nearly as much. But in the meantime, thank you all again, and in particular, thank you to our panelists for joining us here today, and have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, Joel. Thanks for having us, and thanks to the
Thank you.
hosts, particularly Madison, for pulling all that together.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.